I've spent a lot of time with my 3 beautiful granddaughters since they were born. And every day they would bring me some new thing or idea that they'd discovered. And I could see them trying to use it to make sense of their world. Like putting a puzzle piece into a partly completed jigsaw puzzle. Sometimes they'd try and force a piece in where it really didn't fit. They didn't have a box lid with a picture on it to guide them. They had no history. Sometimes their conclusions were hilarious. My computer mouse would become a cell phone, and the vegetable strainer would become an ancient warlord's battle helmet. When crawling and toddling led them to expand their radius of discovery and their enthusiasm for new knowledge. And when language was added into the mix, their evolutionary journey went on steroids. Mummy, why does Daddy have to put gas in the car? Grandpa, why is the car hotter inside than out? Grandma, why do dogs have tails? Why is this so fascinating? Well, I think Charles Darwin did a pretty good job of plotting our evolution from the primordial ooze to where we are now. But having opposable thumbs doesn't explain space travel, the internet, or the iPhone. And my students actually make pretty good use of their opposable thumbs and iPhones, texting when they should be listening to me. But from petroglyphs, the bow and arrow, to the wheel, right through to all the amazing things that surround us now, creativity has been with us always, when we were young and as a species. From Galileo to Steve Jobs, the process is the same. Observe, think, experiment. But this way of thinking requires a broad, divergent view of the world. If we're trying to find where a puzzle piece goes, we have to look at the whole picture, sometimes even imagining pieces not yet in place. Social scientists, by the way, often use divergent thinking as a proxy for measuring creativity. The human brain is inherently lazy, or efficient, if you prefer. Unlike when we were young, when we encounter a new situation, our subconscious riffles through its memory banks to see if we've ever encountered something similar before. And if we have, we make decisions based on that previous scenario. It's really a great strategy for saving time and energy, and it applies to everything we do, from grocery shopping to moving house. We no longer have to start from the beginning when finding new information fits in. We now have history. If we had to actively think of every little action we make during the day, we'd be exhausted by coffee break. We really would. That sort of thinking actually uses as much energy as going for a stroll. These pre-written scripts supply us also with a degree of structure, and that feels very comfortable to us. But they start to erode that youthful, divergent view of the world. We tend to be more analytical and deductive as we become socialized, and our thinking becomes more convergent. And our processes become less creative. Particularly under situations of stress, this leads us to a convergent focus that means we're like a racehorse and we have blinders put on us. By the time my granddaughters started school, they had mastered most of the physical world in which they lived. They knew to keep their fingers away from the car door when it's being slammed shut. A hearty tug on the dog's tail can have negative consequences, as can putting your hand on top of the stovetop, even though it's just been turned off. From an evolutionary perspective, they had maximized their chances of survival. But that's the physical world. Plunged now into a new environment called school, they have to switch between being physicists to being social psychologists and begin to master social norms. They need to abruptly learn the boundaries between acceptable and unacceptable behaviour. The penalty for not mastering these norms can be quite severe. It's called living in the land of misfit toys. My childhood was very different from that of my granddaughters. My dad was 60 when I was born, and he was becoming a world-renowned artist. My highly creative mother was 25. They thought nothing of that age discrepancy. Why should they? They had their art in common. My dad actually never lived with my mother and I didn't even know he was my dad till I was 10. They had a loose relationship with social norms. They were just a very vague guide. And this is a trait often shared by very creative people. When I was 7, 2 men in ill-fitting suits arrived at the boarding school where my mother worked, and they bundled her into a shiny black car with a rather ominous blue lamp on top, supposedly to take her to look after my grandmother. But even at that age, I kind of knew that the police were not taxi drivers. No, my mother was to be institutionalized for the next year. That very lonely, confusing time led to resilience and independence. And I felt no need to apportion blame for this uninvited interruption of my life. But if blame had been applicable, it really shouldn't have fallen on my mother or her creativity, but on the intolerance and stigmatization of the good denizens of rural England in the 1950s. We were paying the price of not fitting in. Fitting in requires socialization, and that can be a lot of work. That can keep us occupied well beyond our teen years. And the extent to which we master social norms can have a significant impact on our success in later life. However, imposing that structure may also undermine our motivation to display our uniqueness through being creative. But social norms themselves are voluntary boundaries that we impose on our thoughts and actions. And maybe that's the clue to preserving our creativity. Starting school or getting a new job can be very exciting, in part because we're satisfying an innate, powerful drive to be members of a group, to be connected with others. The psychologist Abraham Maslow believed that this drive was only second to our need for food and water and was vital to the survival of the species. And to be deprived of the company of others by solitary confinement, for instance, can be a really cruel punishment that only the strongest can survive. We have another powerful drive that is also fundamental to the survival of the species, and that is to be and to be seen to be different, individual, with a unique set of characteristics, beliefs, opinions, likes, dislikes. And these two drives are very much in opposition, because on the one hand, if we're focused on group membership, then we have to think and act within the boundaries of the group norms. And that means we're focused on our similarities with others, with other group members. On the other hand, when we're focused on our individuality, it is our uniqueness, our differences from others, that actually motivate us. I'd like you to think of which of these two drives is important if we're focused on being creative. Because these drives are in tension. And my research, and that of others, has shown that anything that attracts you to one of these drives tends to reduce the impact of the other. So, in other words, something that attracts us to being members of a group will tend to reduce our motivation to display our uniqueness through creativity. Putting this another way, maximizing our creativity requires us to prioritize our individuality over our group connectedness, at least while we're being creative. Research consistently ranks the US as being one of the most individualistic countries in the world, and also one of the most innovative. Now, looking at this model, that's what you would expect, isn't it? All this makes sense. Creativity requires that we do things differently from other people. Otherwise, we follow the same path and we get the same result. Isn't that the definition of insanity? So creativity is not a special skill, it's a way of thinking. So it's not surprising that highly creative people show creativity in many different areas of their life. In other words, they're not creative because they produce great works of art. They produce great works of art because they think creatively. Now, as I said previously, creativity is a core human drive, but at the societal level, it has ebbed and flowed through history. In the first millennium in China, in the Italian Renaissance, in the Industrial Revolution, technology progressed by leaps and bounds, but as did many of the creative expressions. We had music, we had literature, we had philosophy also progressing. In the 20th century, however, perhaps because we had 2 world wars and a Great Depression, the focus tended to be on the practical, in other words, technology, and also on the professions that were safe and stable. When sex was safe and skydiving was dangerous, I was a long-haired teenager plugged into a guitar amp in somebody's garage. And any suggestion that one could make a living out of being creative was met with derision, sarcasm, even humor. So, you want to be a rock star, do you? You do know the difference, don't you, between a musician and a large pizza? What? Well, the large pizza can feed a family of 4. Even now, it tends to be technology-related professions that we revere, partly because of the wonderful things they do to our way of living, and also because of economic growth. This trend results from the way we think. Our logical, deductive patterns of thought really leave very little room for the neural pathways associated with creativity, which also happens to be the ones that are associated with emotional intelligence, by the way. I believe this imbalance has negative consequences and may contribute to the rapid growth of burnout and other anxiety and stress disorders, all of which tend to show that horse with blinders effect and cause us to see the world through a smaller window. Because of the divergent nature of thinking creatively, it opens up our field of vision. It tends to remove those blinders and enables us to see more possibilities. Let me share with you a few ideas from my book that I use to guide my burnout clients to start thinking more creatively. It's all about shaking the snow globe, breaking away from our usual patterns of thought. First thing in the morning, don't go to the coffee machine. Head for a cup of ginger tea instead. When you go to your favorite restaurant, choose something different from the menu, or even choose a different restaurant. Get with friends and family and figure out a different recreation that you can all utilize together, or take the family to a new park and have a picnic at the weekend. When planning a vacation or moving house or other goal for the future, make a dream or vision board. One of my clients made this before their family, the whole family went to Costa Rica. And it's a very good way of engaging in this plan at an emotional rather than an intellectual level. The decision-making processes become much more fun and creative. And it enables you to engage in the process that feels as if you're actually being in the future. Finally, when you make everyday decisions at work or at home, make them with intention. Notice if you have sort of knee-jerk reactions to make a decision, and stop yourself. Have a look at the options that you really have. Initially, this is a lot of extra cognitive effort, and it can be tiring. But persist. It gets easier. Life gets more exciting, more fulfilling, and more enjoyable. And your decision-making will improve because you are generating more options. In the words of John F. Kennedy, conformity is the jailer of freedom and the enemy of growth. Let's shake the snow globe, reintroduce creativity into our lives. Observe, think, experiment. Thank you.